Did you know a dog was tried for witchcraft? It sounds truly bizarre to our modern ears, yet this actually happened in historical records. This single strange fact opens a window. It reveals a very different kind of mindset, a world that was deeply gripped by fear. A fear of the unknown, certainly, but also a fear of the explainable, twisted by belief. Animals sadly often faced such accusations. They were frequently seen as familiars. These were believed to be supernatural entities, or spirits in animal form, assisting witches. This way of thinking seems profoundly alien now, but it was a deadly serious matter then. It shows how wide the net of suspicion could be cast, a truly terrifying prospect for anyone or anything. Understanding this darkness is crucial for us. It helps us to see reflections of ourselves. Salem, Massachusetts is famous in this dark story. But it was certainly not unique, not by far. The phenomenon of witch trials swept across Europe. This happened long before Salem and continued after. Countries like Germany, France and Switzerland saw thousands. Tens of thousands of people perished in these hunts. It was a vast continental wave of persecution, not just a small, isolated colonial outlier event. Early on, the legal frameworks were often loose. Sometimes they were entirely non-existent in a formal sense. Accusations alone were frequently enough to condemn someone. Torture was systematically used to extract confessions. This, as you can imagine, created a terrible cycle. More coerced confessions inevitably meant more accusations. The Malleus Maleficarum, a notorious book, guided witch hunters. It served as a dreadful manual for persecution. The invention of the printing press was relatively new. It allowed ideas to spread with unprecedented speed. When we consider witch trials, we often think of accusers, and of course the accused, the unfortunate victims. But there were other key players in these dramas, the orchestrators and amplifiers of the widespread panic. Witch-finders emerged as self-proclaimed paid experts. They often profited directly from the fear they cultivated. They traveled from town to town, finding witches, for a handsome fee, naturally. Consider a man named Matthew Hopkins in England. He famously called himself the Witch-finder General. He operated during the 1640s. This was a turbulent time of civil war. He and his associates were directly responsible for the terrible deaths of hundreds of accused people. His methods were notoriously cruel and his tests absurd. His influence was utterly devastating for many communities, a dark star in this sorrowful chapter of history. But it is important to remember, not everyone believed. Some brave souls did indeed speak out against it. They questioned the flimsy evidence presented in courts. They courageously challenged the prevailing mass hysteria. Figures like Johann Weyer, a respected physician. Imagine, if you will, a time before widespread science, a time before science as we understand it today. Sickness, sudden storms, devastating crop failures. These events were terrifying, often inexplicable mysteries back then. People desperately needed explanations for their suffering. They naturally sought causes for the hardships they endured. Witchcraft, unfortunately, offered a seemingly simple answer. A simple, if terrifying, explanation for complex events. Deeply held religious beliefs were absolutely central to daily life. The devil was considered a very real, active entity. It was believed he had agents working on Earth. Witches were widely seen as these earthly agents. They were thought to be doing his evil bidding. This was not merely a metaphor for most people. It was perceived as a literal, undeniable truth, a cosmic battle between good and evil playing out. When bad things happened, as they always do, it seemed that someone had to be blamed. A sudden, unexplained illness striking a family member, a cow that mysteriously stopped giving its milk. It was often psychologically easier to blame a neighbor. The witch hunts often flared up most intensely. This occurred during periods of great and unusual social stress, times of war, widespread famines, or deadly epidemics. These crises created pervasive anxiety throughout the population. People felt powerless, vulnerable, and deeply uncertain. They desperately looked for some sense of control, or at least someone to punish for their many woes. Accusations of witchcraft could also become potent weapons. They were sometimes used in local power struggles, a way to get rid of personal or political rivals, a method to seize coveted property or gain influence. Old festering grudges could easily resurface during these times. They were often hidden beneath a veneer of righteous claims. Human conflict, sadly, cloaked in the language of piety, a dark and troubling side of community dynamics. Economic factors also undoubtedly played a significant role. Scarcity of essential resources often led to increased tension. Competition for good land or sufficient food became fierce. Accusing someone of witchcraft, in some instances, could conveniently remove a competitor from the scene. We often instinctively picture witches primarily as women. Indeed, many of the victims were certainly female, especially older women or those who were poor, but men were also accused of witchcraft, and even children in some horrifying cases. Accusations of witchcraft actually crossed gender lines, though it remains true that women were disproportionately targeted. This is a crucial nuance to remember. Children were not only victims in these tragic events, they were also sometimes the accusers themselves. Their testimonies were often seen as particularly powerful, even if those testimonies were unreliable or clearly coerced. And yes, as we touched upon at the beginning, animals were sometimes formally tried for witchcraft in courts. Dogs, cats, and even insects faced such charges. This reflects a profoundly different, almost alien worldview. The methods used to prove someone was a witch. They were frequently bizarre, cruel, and impossible to pass. The infamous swimming test, for example, is notorious. If the accused person floated, they were deemed a witch. If they sank, and likely drowned, they were innocent. The Enlightenment brought profound change. Focus on reason and science grew.